Welcome to Releasing Your Inner Dragon, where story creators talk story creation. Drake is an award-winning fantasy novelist and creative writing teacher. You can find his epic fantasy series, The Genesis Oblivion, on Kindle Vella. Marie runs a fantasy world-building channel called Just in Time Worlds, and her first book, The Hidden Blade, is available on Kindle Unlimited. We hope you enjoy this episode. Today, we're going to start our discussion talking about races and species and how to write them. So, Drake, do you want to kick us off with a starting point?
A disclaimer, maybe?
Sure. Let's start with the disclaimer.
So, this is one of those parts where I'm not a fan of where our world is going, with a lot of its political correctness and everything like that. And so I do believe that storytellers should hold themselves above all of the rigmarole that has become, whatever you want to call it, wokeness, liberal, progressive, leftist, political correctness, all of those things. For a society, they're great or they're not great, depending on which side you're on. If we get down to what and again, every writer is going to have different definitions of what they define their job as. But me as a story creator, my definition for myself is I want to create a story that forces the readers into very uncomfortable situations so that when they come out the other side of that story, they are a better human being. That's my job that I've dictated to myself. And that's one of the reasons why I love being a fantasy author, is because fantasy unshackles me from the world at large. I've heard the accusations where somebody will tell a white male author who wrote something about slavery, and somebody will be like, well, what do you know about slavery? Blah, 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 blah. And it's first of all, it's a dumb thing to even accuse them of, because that's kind of the job of a writer, is to use empathy and imagination to create these situations. But like in the Genesis saga,
we know about half of anything,
right? But in the Genesis saga, I delve pretty deeply into slavery. But the cool thing is nobody can ask me that question. Nobody can say, there was a white man, what do you know about slavery? I'm like, well, it's a lion dude. What do you know about lion dudes? Because it's a lion dude that's a slave. Like, are you a lion dude? Then shut up. That's the thing that fantasy allows me to do. It allows me to unshackle myself from the political correctness of the world. But, on that same token, I still have humans, and there are white humans and Asian humans and black humans and, whatever. I don't know. Like, this is one of those topics that could get people into trouble if you look at it from a discussion of our world. But I truly believe that authors and story creators need to hold themselves above that, especially if you feel your job is in line with what I feel my job is, where I'm trying to create a story that's going to put you into that uncomfortable situation, talking about whatever, rape, slavery, bigotry, sexism, whatever, like all of these horrible human topics that we want to delve into as story creators, which are going to be uncomfortable for our readers. And it's uncomfortable on purpose because we want them to live. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to get my readers to live through horrific, human things, but from the safety of their own wherever, while they're reading my book in the comfort of whatever. So like, they're not actually in danger. I'm just, taking them on an imaginative ride where I'm going to make them feel like they're in danger. And with the outcome of hopefully they become better people, more cognizant of these horrible or social issues, at the end of my story. When we turn to discussing fantasy races, then, a lot of people love to say, oh, you're just talking about racism in our world. No, I'm not, because I'm literally a fantasy author. So that's kind of the disclaimer, is, to have this discussion, you got to kind of unshackle yourself. And again, as a story creator, you should unshackle yourself from our world. You should not be beholden. And then that's actually a trend. It's a trend in publishing. It's a trend in movies. It's a trend in TV to push these social narratives that aren't real. Like, they're really exaggerating, a lot of the stuff for their own political agenda, as opposed to trying to make people more aware of these situations.
And there is a place for social commentary. 1984 is one of my favorite novels.
Mm-hmm.
I read Animal Farm multiple times. I've enjoyed it. On the other side of that coin, just in case somebody accuses me of not looking to the other side, I have read What Is to Be Done multiple times from Chevnesky, which was Lenin's favorite book, in case you were wondering what that is. There is a place for social commentary.
Right. And that's literally what we're doing.
Fantasy can carry a lot of themes that echo back to social commentary.
Mm-hmm.
But don't read your entire political agenda into a fantasy novel.
Well, and it's not even just fantasy novels. That's, in my opinion, storytelling, especially in mainstream like Hollywood, is suffering because instead of doing actual human stories with actual, rhyme and reason for how humans interact with each other, both, and I'm talking about both the good and the bad, they, instead of doing that thematic element and following that and creating a good story that impacts the audience, they just shove their political agenda in it, and it's awkward. Anytime you do that, if like you take 1984, that is a political agenda piece from start to finish, but it also is the thematic element. It's the driving force. It's what the world was created off of. It is the story. Every aspect of it is about that thing. But when you have a story about something else, and then you shove, 1984 in the middle of it, I mean, it's like, we're going to make a Thor movie, but we're going to use a lot of elements from 1984. Like, no, it's never going to fit. You're literally corrupting one thematic element with another thematic element, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when the story has jack all to do with what your political agenda is, and yet you shove that political agenda into it. I had a negative review on this kids movie that I've written. It's in the process of it's in pre-production, trying to get funded and all that. So who knows if it'll ever actually see the light of day, because most movies don't make it. But there's one negative review on it that this one person had read, and it's a story where you have this sub race that isn't human living kind of in the shadow of humans. They do a lot of they're smaller, they can't use magic, so they're not like Dobby, where they're total slaves. They're free people, but they do a lot of the menial jobs. They do a lot of the cleaning and cooking and sweeping and stuff like that. That's what they are. It's just kind of the way the society is, and then the humans kind of take on more of the political, military, all of that type of stuff. But it's a kids movie, so none of that really is in the movie at all. It's just kind of the overlay, the dressing of this.
Yeah.
The story is about this little, they're called fizz bears, and it's this little fizz bear character who goes on a journey and learns about relying on yourself, believing in yourself, friendship, all these great thematic elements that are, I think important for the target audience, which is 8 to 11-year-olds. And the reviewer, and this is a professional, this isn't like this is like, it hasn't been made, so these are people that get paid to actually basically score scripts, and then let that score is then used for investors, to entice investors to come in and all this other stuff. So that when I say a review, I don't mean like some dude went and watched it and then wrote a review on Amazon. These are guys that get paid to look at it from a physical standpoint to see if it could be successful money-making venture. And so he or she, because it's all blind, gave me a low score for 2 reasons, and they were very clear on this. One, I didn't go into any detail about what it was like to live in a under the racism of humanity, since I was, since the main character's a fizz bear. And 2, I didn't mention oppressor or oppressed at all, and I didn't delve into those topics when I should have. And it's like
aimed at 8 to 12-year-olds.
Right. Well, but even it doesn't matter. The story's not about any of that. None of that is the thematic elements that I'm playing with in the story. This person wants me to interject their political agenda in a story that just doesn't exist. That's not what the story's about. I could make a story about that, and there's been millions of stories made about that. Not just 1984, but there's been tons. I mean, go back to Roots or go back to whatever. We've had tons of stories that are designed to have the thematic elements of these specific political agendas.
I mean, Green Mile definitely had strong overtures of Stephen King's Green Mile.
But when you shove those into Godzilla, it reads as terrible. When you shove those into, they did one little line in Loki that pissed me off, that I'm like, you're just shoving that in. That doesn't fit. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, they have a couple of those scenes where it's just like, no, you're shoving in this thematic element that doesn't even fit with the overall thematic element. And so it ends up hurting the stories as opposed to helping them. And so this is a long disclaimer, and so we need to get this back around, or you might cut half of that. But like, it still comes down to the fact, if we're going to talk about races, I think it's important to understand where we're coming from when we're talking about races, because we're not talking about the political correctness of our world. We're talking about using these fantasy elements, races, classes, sexes, the whole nine yards, to push thematic elements that we're trying to push. If your story is literally designed to be a political agenda piece, then great. You've done it. V for Vendetta, another great example of a political agenda piece. And it's a fantastic story, and it works. When you shove it into Finding Nemo, which they didn't, but I'm just saying, when you shove it into a movie like Finding Nemo, all you do is break Finding Nemo, because the story is not built to be that story. And so you're just trying to shoehorn this thing in and screwing it up. So that's my disclaimer. It's really long.
So let me say how we got onto this topic and why we decided to tackle this topic. So I recently critiqued a story where I really enjoyed the story. It was an engaging little story between two teenagers who are, they want to get married. The boy's mother doesn't really want them to get married. It's a cute, engaging story. And somewhere in the last 3/4 of the story, the boy's mother says something like, remember, you're going to have to live with your choices a lot longer. And because we're not human, you're going to have to live with your choices a lot longer. And I just stopped and I kind of stared at the screen. I was like, no, I don't buy it. Nothing. It was a blind read, right? So it was a blind read on a website critique site. So nothing in the story up to now has in any way, shape, or form convinced me that these characters are not human.
Well, it sounds like what this writer fell into the trap of is you're assuming that other races are going to look at the world through a human lens, because that's what that statement says. That statement says is, so because I look at, and I'm gonna put some assumptions here. I'm gonna assume that you're saying they're choosing to get married young, and now they're gonna have hundreds of years that they have to be husband and wife. And so what they're doing is that I'm the mother. I live for hundreds of years. So if I got married, I have to be, but I'm not going to look at that as normal. I'm going to look as normal as only living to 80 years of age. And so you have to marry, if you marry somebody and you're married for 50 years, you die. Like, that's it. And so that's normal to me, even though I live for thousands of years. No, it's not normal to me. I would never, it's sort of like, in the first novella of or the first story of the Realm of the Dying Sun that I wrote, I am throwing, you try to look for opportunities to throw in descriptions of the POV characters. And so everyone in the scene is an elf, everyone.
Yeah.
And elves in this world do have pointy ears. We've decided that.
Yeah.
But you have 4 elves and the narrating character's an elf. And so I do want to give some descriptors of like what everybody looks at, especially the POV. So one of the things that I wrote is that the wind was blowing and it felt really good, but it was annoying because it kept blowing his long blonde hair into his face. And so he was constantly having to thumb it behind his ears. Now, I could have written behind his pointy ears. But the thing is when I push my hair behind my ears, I don't think to myself, I've got to put my hair behind my rounded ears, because rounded ears are normal. Everyone I know has a rounded ear. My parents, my siblings, my friends, everybody. So I'm not going to comment on the fact that they're round because it's normal. And so, yes, I'm taking a little bit of liberties by saying blonde hair, because, you know, we usually don't even really think about what color our hair is, because it's been that color for our entire lives, unless, you know, obviously you can dye it or whatever.
But you can do cunning things, right? Especially ears are cunning, because you can make jewelry that fits on an elvish ear.
Right.
So you can refer to the triangular ear caps,
certainly,
you know, with their blah, 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 that, you know, or the weight of the earring that he had in the tip of his ear.
Yep. None of that. Again, it has to fit with the character and has to fit with.
Sure. But I mean, you know.
You're 100% right. But, you know, and that's where I get into. So one of the things, and this is where why I wanted to make that huge disclaimer, because I can get into trouble with this. The funny thing is we actually talked about this. I've talked about this before. I have a private writer group every Wednesday for me, but it's every other Wednesday for them because it's 2 groups. Last night's group, we literally got into this discussion. So sitting around the table, there are 4 white men, a black woman, and a Filipino man.
Yeah.
That's the group. You know, when we were talking about describing things, I said, look, you know, I know this isn't politically correct, but let's say I'm writing a story where I'm the narrating character. If I was describing this table, I would describe it as 4 guys, a black woman, and a Filipino.
Yeah. Because
the other 3 white guys are just like me. They're not different. And so I don't, and that's just kind of how I write, because I see, as humans, that's what we do. We, you know, I was on a panel one time and I kind of got in a little bit of trouble because it was a panel, like, this was the dumb thing. It was down in Arizona, and it's a panel on writing other cultures and races. And the panel comprised of 4 white people. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, it seems like you'd want to put a little bit more diversity on this panel than when we're talking about diversity. But it opened up. Well, there was 3 guys and 1 woman, and just literally as soon as the panel started, this one woman jumped right in, and she was like, "I don't see color," and I literally, and this is just me being an ass, but there was a black woman sitting in the front row, and I was like, "So that chair's empty to you?" And she's like, "What?" I'm like, "There's a person sitting there, and you're telling me you can't see them?" And she's like, "What? Like, you said you can't see color, so I guess that chair is empty to you. You don't see a black woman sitting there." And she's like, "No, I see her." I'm like, "Oh, but she's see-through to you? She's to you? Like, what do you mean you don't see? It's a black woman sitting right there. I could reach out and touch her right there. She's a black woman." And it's like, that's the dumbest statement to me. Yeah. You know, this whole, we don't see, the problem comes in when people, you know, and this is where racism comes in. Racism is where you feel you are superior to other races, or you feel they're inferior to you, which is all bullshit. We're humans. Yes. And that's actually I have been protesting. I'm not an activist, but I have, this last month, I've had to do a lot of medical things, and I'm protesting. This is the extent of my protest. When I get down to race, I write human. Like, I'm not going to put anything but human, because I'm a human. Screw you. Because, you know, I believe that. I believe we're all humans, and we're humans first. And yeah, we're different. We're different colors. We're different sexes. We're different. We have different likes. We have different desires. We have different religions and social things and food that we like. But that just creates great variety. That's awesome.
That doesn't undermine your humanity.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. We're all still human.
Yes.
We all still have loves, desires, and hates and wants, and we like certain foods and we dislike certain foods, and we like certain things and we dislike certain, all of us, every single one of us. Like, it's just, but that's the thing. I still see black people when I walk into a room. I go, "Oh, that guy's black." Yeah. Where I don't necessarily go, "Oh, that guy's white," you know, because that's just a guy.
Yeah, so here's an interesting question for you, since we're on this topic. Like, if you walk into a room and there's a woman, do you look and go, "That's a woman"? Like, do you understand what I'm saying? Do you have the same?
Well, and so when I say, oh, that's a black guy, I don't actually think to myself,
no, I know what you mean.
I just see, in my mind that, I see the difference. And yes, when I see women, they're different than me. So I got in a really interesting discussion after class this month. I always go out to dinner with whoever wants to go out. And this one guy brought his wife, and she's tiny, like 4'7", 4'8", 4'2" even. I don't even remember what it was. She is
that's about a meter something, right?
Really small. Okay. And so we got into this discussion about that. And I said, one of the weird things about me is I'm 6'1". So I'm not the biggest guy you'll ever meet by any stretch of the imagination. However, I rarely look up to a guy. So even like that, just on height, I see difference. I look down to almost the entire human race because I'm 6'1". Yeah. But when I hit a 6'2", 6'3", 6'4" guy, and I have to look up because they are more rare than me, it's weird. Yeah. And I don't notice people that are shorter than me at all, unless, you get down into that 4'2". My mom's 4'10". Yeah. My dad was 6'4", but my mom's 4'10". So I, kind of got somewhere in the middle. Yeah. But, so unless you're really, really short, I don't notice if you're 5'6", 5'8", 5'10", whatever, those, it doesn't, but you're still below me. And so it's comfortable for me because most people are below me in height. Yeah. Nothing arrogant here. It's height. So when I do run it, and so we started talking about it, she was like, yeah, I don't really, like, everyone's taller than me. So I don't ever, you're right, I don't think about that. She goes, but I have occasionally ran into someone who was shorter than me, and she's like, yeah, that's weird. It's really weird to me when, because she's whatever, 4'8". I don't really remember what she was. I just remember she was under 5 foot, or at least I think she was. But she's like, yeah, so a very few times where I do stand next to an adult, children obviously haven't grown yet, so she's next to a 4-year-old, obviously it's going to be shorter than her. But when she did, she was like, I never thought about that because it's happened so rarely. But you're right. When I come up to an adult that's shorter than me, it does feel weird because it's a difference. And so I do believe the humans see differences. I do. And the whole fictitiousness of I don't see color, like, that's just, it's wrong. And so that's kind of my take. And this is why, and again, nothing racist about this. It has to do with, they're just different than me, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong about it. There's nothing right about it. Differences are difference. Like, that's it. That's all they are. That's how I try to describe my world.
So your MC wouldn't describe other elves. You wouldn't describe their pointy ears, etc., except in passing, as we would describe. Like, I would describe somebody who has a different facial structure from me. Right. Like, if I saw an Asian person's a good example, right? Because they have a different eye socket slant to me.
Yep.
If I saw somebody whose eye socket slant is different from mine, I would describe that.
Yes.
Right. So if your MC
but I wouldn't describe round-eyed Westerners. No. Because I'm a round-eyed Westerner. Yes. And I'm saying me as in the narrating character. Yeah. I've been Asian, I'm an Asian character as a main character in the Genesis saga. Like in Genesis saga, I have black main characters, Asian main characters. Technically you could call them Hispanic or maybe Middle Eastern. They're just a more brownish, color, whatever you want to say. In my mind, they're more Middle Easterner than anything else, but you could also say they were Hispanic because there's a lot of similarities there, and white. And then I have other races as well, that aren't human. One of the reasons why I like to have main characters from, all of these different aspects is because it allows me to look at the other races from their perspective. Yeah. And so, when I do get into the Asian character, I can now look at these round-eyed, technically Westerners. I mean, obviously this is a fantasy world, but it allows me to describe them from their perspective, from this, more Asian. Again, I don't have Asians. I don't have white and black. It's a fantasy world. They're Roarthians.
You can describe their racial characteristics.
But it does still allow me to do that from this, because they're different than me. When I'm an Asian, the round eyes are different than me, and so I can describe that.
But at the same time, like if I were to describe somebody that I'm looking at, like I'm looking at somebody, so I'm looking at another woman, another white woman even, I would notice if she has blonde hair or red hair or brown hair.
Yeah, absolutely. Those big the big characteristics, I think we do, which is why I didn't mind in that statement where I said he thumbed his long blonde hair behind his ear. I don't mind doing that, because it and there's other liberties you could take. I mean, that's the thing. We just try to look for organic ways. So like one of the things is I kind of want to bring in the realm of the Dying Sun, the elves are very racist. This main character that I'm writing is much more progressive, and he's from a generation that is trying to make the world a better place with, as far as inclusivity with the other races. And that's the thing, we're talking about actual races, not skin color. So we're talking about dwarves and my version of halflings is called a fee, and orcs and ogres and all this other stuff. Like he's trying to build a better world, but he's still from a world that is incredibly racist, because the elves in this empire are the only ones that control magic, and so they literally have machine guns where everyone else has sticks and rocks. And so from a military standpoint, they are not even touchable. And so they've 500-year empire built off of slavery. Like there is a lot of, and those are the thematic elements that I want to play with. Those are the social elements that I want to play with. And so, I do have that. So I do like one of the other elves is what you would, and I kind of took the whole Nazi Aryan kind of thing of, where they talk about the perfect human, they had that, you had to have the blue eyes, the blonde hair, the this, the that, and the other thing. And so his father is not, even though his father started this progressive movement, the son is more progressive than the father. And so I do describe one of the elves in this kind of weird way, where I describe the elf through the perception of the narrator's father. So he goes, my father would call this guy the epitome of good elven stock, because he has this and that and this. And so I'm not only kind of introducing a little bit of racism in there to kind of start bringing those thematic elements into the forefront of the story, but also using it to describe the elf himself and what is considered perfect elf versus not, because like the other elf has dark hair. And so I do make a comment on the fact that dark-haired elves are not, looked upon as well as pure blonde-haired elves. And so again, it's bringing in the thematic elements that I want to play with, and on a very small little, we're talking about a couple sentences of description, and yet I'm still starting to plant those seeds of, hey, we're going to be talking about racism here, because that's a thematic topic that I want to delve into, the slavery, the racism, all of that, Nazism, even though obviously there's no Nazis in this world. But it literally goes
that kind of strive for perfection bloodline kind of thing.
Right, exactly. And so there are ways to do it that feel very organic without going, and then I looked into the mirror, into my deep hazel eyes, and I started combing my long blonde hair. And I went, oh my God, what is that, a wrinkle? How does a woman of only 43 already have this many wrinkles? Nobody has ever done that in the history of ever. Like, it's so horrible writing. But I see it in prose all the time.
Oh goodness. I'll give the person that I questioned on their like, is this really a non-human race? I'll give them this. They didn't do that. But they went too far the other way.
Right. It's a balance.
Yeah. I could not believe, I couldn't bring myself to believe that this is not a human race. Because I'm like, but I have nothing to base this on.
Right.
There is no reason for me to think.
Again, I will challenge that there is a problem there. Not only did this writer obviously go too far in the vanilla, where they describe nothing. So that's the thing. When a writer
described things, so they described hair and eyes and so on, but everybody has hair and eyes. Like
right. Well, that's what I'm saying. When you don't describe things as a writer in prose, your readers are going to still imagine them.
Yeah.
So it just doesn't matter. And so one, they went a little too vanilla. So there wasn't enough to make you understand that there was. And that is a problem, but that's not a horrible problem, because again, that's kind of, and in the next episode, we're going to talk about a lot of this stuff, and we're talking about, because that fits into the next topic as well.
It does.
Spoiler. But I think they actually made a mistake on the other side, where again, if I'm this other race, I don't view the world through a human lens, and yet I'm now making comments on what normality is based off of something that I'm not even that person or that race. And so that's where I think the big mistake on that is where it's like, oh, you're not human. Remember, we live for thousands of years. And so, you get married, you're going to be with this person for thousands of years. And that goes back to, when I'm teaching my world building class, and I talk about, don't do the as you know dialogue. So the example that I have in there is, Finn said to Ren, remember, Ren, me and you are elfins, and elfins can only eat honey. Because if I was Finn, I'd be like, yeah, I freaking know that. I'd love to eat a cheeseburger once in a while, but I can't because I was born an elfin and I can only eat this damn honey every day. Honey. Like, why would you tell me that? Because to me, that's the exact same thing of saying, hey, Maria, remember, me and you are humans, so make sure you're breathing air while we're doing our podcast or you'll die. Like, I would never say that. It's stupid. We all know this.
And I'd be like, Drake, what kind of medication are you on?
Right. But that's the thing. And in fantasy, they do it all the time because they're like, oh my God, I've got to give this information to them. And so I always take that. There's organic ways to do that. Everything. First of all, you could just have them eat honey. If the only thing they ever eat is honey,
just eat honey.
Then that's going to let the reader kind of know that. But there are other ways. You can bring in an anchor character. Remember, the definition of an anchor character is somebody who just doesn't know something.
As we spoke about last time with the mentors. Yeah.
Yeah. So
and the dumb character.
Yeah. So you now have Drake who is talking to Finn, and he's like, Drake is eating a cheeseburger, and he goes, oh, I'm sorry, I'm being rude. Would you like a bite of my cheeseburger? And Finn goes, no, I would love to, but we elfins can only eat honey. We'll die if we eat anything else. And I'm like, oh, wow, that sucks. Like, I didn't know that. So sorry. Maybe I shouldn't be eating this in front of you. You're like, it's this organic way of getting this information into the story, as opposed to, remember, Ren, we're elfins. Like, yes, I know that. I was born this way. And so I think goes back to there, where they're basically judging the world through a racial eyes that they're not even that race. And again, that's why I think it's very natural the way I do, because I don't call attention to it either. I don't go, oh, now I'm an Asian character, so let me describe all these white characters. Oh, now I'm a black character, so let me describe all these Asian. I don't do that. It's just, I just describe the world the way they see it. And since they see a lot of differences, they tend to be the ones that describe, that's how I describe other races. And so it's just this organic way of, seeing that. But, I grew up a minority. I grew up in the Deep South, where, the place I grew up was 20% white and 80% black. And so, when I moved out of that area and got into areas that were way more white, that was weird to me, because I didn't like white people. Like, look at all these white people. I don't trust this. There's way too many white people around here. What's going on? Because they were different. I was never in that environment where there's just all these white people. And so again, that was an adjustment for me. And so all of these little learning lessons through life is where I was like, I bet you that's the way a lot of people. And again, as a writer, you make your best guess and you do what you're going to do. And no one's called me on it. No one's ever read anything of mine and go, wow, you're really racist in how you describe things. They just don't, because it's just this organic way of, we see differences. And so I just, into the character that I'm in the head of, will see more differences or what motivates them. Another thing I talk about.
Like, I don't know if I've read any fantasy that is specifically racist per se. Like, there are some fantasy authors that are, I would say that all of their characters are white. That's not exactly racism. It's just weird. They cannot get out of their own heads enough to have not white people in their world, which is just weird.
Right. And that was the thing. Like, when I wrote when I first started writing Genesis, it was way before I was published. It was the 9th book that I wrote, but I wasn't published yet. So I'm still just writing and learning writing and all of that.
Yeah.
And, just ended up being the first novel of mine that was published. But that was the thing. Like, growing up as a minority, it never, when I would read fantasy, because I started reading fantasy young, it never read true to me, because that wasn't, I looked at this world that you created and it was monochromatic. And then I looked at the world that I lived in, and it was
different colors.
It was filled with differences.
Yeah.
And so same thing with Dungeons and Dragons. We always used to joke that the drow were the black people. Because it's the only color, everyone else is white, and then the drow are gray. And it's like, well, and then we obviously you had green, but you killed everything that was green. If it was green, you killed it. And so, like, that was the weirdness that I always had playing D&D growing up, because it's like, this doesn't feel like the world that I live in.
Yeah.
Like, this feels weird to me. And so when I started writing, I didn't think about it. I didn't go, oh, I'm going to have every race because I need to be, politically correct. That never was why I did it. I did it because it felt right to me. It's sort of like,
because that's what, this is what's so, one of the things that is so weird to me is, like, because you see the same thing. Tolkien is a great example of this on the female side, and we're veering way off topic, but it's still relevant. Tolkien does not write a female character below the neck. Women stop here.
Yeah.
And I know it's a product of his time. I don't, I don't hold him to any other kind of stat. Like, I'm not saying anything weird. It's just, but it is weird when you read it.
Yeah.
Like, it's
and
weird.
And that's the other kind of half of my disclaimer, I guess. It's weird to me that we live in a world that people hold the past accountable to our moral values today. I love that we have grown as a species. I love that, we are way less racist, way less sexist, way less all this stuff. But it's weird to go, how come they weren't that way when they wrote this book in 1712?
Yes.
Like, because it was 1712. They didn't have our moral compasses. Like, they didn't have this stuff. It was foreign to them.
There's this ancient book that was written at the turn of in the 1900s called The Quest for Fire, which was written in French by a Belgian author. You can get the translation on Amazon Kindle. But when I read it, like, it's not even like Tolkien, which, just doesn't have women below the neck. It's pretty much blatantly misogynistic.
Yeah.
Even though it's a caveman story. But it's a great caveman story. It's a really enjoyable kind of caveman story, and you don't get many of those. They basically come in Jane M. All and Quest for Fire variety. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
So, and I read it and enjoyed it for what it was. But when I recommended it on my channel, I was like, if you read it, be advised, the attitude towards women is specific to its time.
To me, it's weird that you have to make that disclaimer. It's weird that people get offended for reality of the way the world was.
Yeah.
We should not wipe that, under the, so that's why when you have
it was like, they were like that. They thought like that. So their literature is like that. It's
right. Right. I mean, back in the 1700s, there were places that if me and you were married and I was just done, I would just take you down to the center square and auction you off.
Yeah.
Not as a slave. You weren't a slave, but I was like, hey, she's a good wife. She's really good at cleaning this. She doesn't do this very well, which is why I'm tired of her. But, these are her good qualities. Anybody want her? I'll take a chicken. I'll take a cow. I'll take a little bit of money. And then you're now just that person's wife. Like that was and is that a horrible, shitty, god awful way to be? Yes. But it was still the way it was. And you can't whitewash that and say that it wasn't that way.
Yeah.
You also can't hold them accountable when that's in the story. If that's a part of the story that we're telling because it's a period piece or whatever, I mean, you know, it's the reason why.
So here I want to say a funny thing. Like I need to tell the story because it amuses me endlessly. So the Finnish language does not distinguish pronouns. I don't know if you knew that, but it doesn't.
We've talked about that, and that's still weird to me.
So he and she, same pronoun, no difference. So the Harry Potter story, there was a dude who thought that Snape was a woman until he saw the movies.
Yeah.
It's just
but it seems like that would happen with every movie. If you don't have a difference in a literature, then you, again, anything you don't describe, the reader's going to describe for you. Yeah. So if Harry Potter or any Finnish translation has no sex, every reader is going to assign sex to every character.
So it's not that there's no sex, it's just that the pronouns are the same, right? But you know, from kind of the context of the sentence, like, you know, but Snape is described as having long, greasy hair.
Right. But I'm just saying that's got to be a more common mistake than just Snape, is all I'm saying. Because the reader's going to assign, because you have to, you're imagining this world characters, you're going to imagine them. Like, so in the opening chapter of Genesis, I have this being show up, and you can only see this being through this little barred window because the camera's inside this cell with the lion dude, and it never leaves the cell. And so this creature, this being comes up and has this dealings with him for a moment. And one of the questions, so, you know, at the end of when I'm writing, I have all these beta questions. There are all these open-ended questions because I want to know if I've succeeded. And so one of the questions on that chapter is, first of all, what sex are you? Second of all, what sex do you think, and the character's called the honored one, what sex do you think the honored one is? And then why? And the reason why I'm asking that question is I want the reader not to know. I want the reader in that chapter to not know if it's a male or a female character. And I know I succeeded because of my 50 beta readers or whatever. 25 of them said, I think it's male and here's why. And 25 of them said, I think it's female and here's why. So obviously I succeeded because it's a dumb little reveal, but later on, a couple chapters from now, you actually find out what sex they are, and the narrating character is shocked by the answer. And so I wanted the reader to feel some of that awe as well. And so I wanted to make sure I wrote it in a way that you honestly had no idea or really couldn't lock into it. Obviously you're going to 25, said that it was male and 25 said it was female. So they did put gender to it regardless, but now, and it doesn't matter which way you
think when I answered that, I said, I don't have enough information.
Okay. I forgot that you had read that too. So and that's fine too, because I'm not giving you enough information to know, because you're looking at a face through a bar, through a barred window. Like that's it. You're looking, that's it. That's all you get. You never get anything else. You never get the rest of the body. And so but even when you see the body, this species doesn't have a lot of exterior. The men and women look very similar. Internally, they can see the differences between, like, they're like, how could you not tell that that's a woman? But externally, the race, if you're not of that race, you really can't tell the difference between guys and girls. From a human standpoint, looking at them, they all look the same. I know that's the stereotypical racist thing to say, but they really do. From outside of their race, they cannot tell the difference. Their mannerisms, their speech, their everything is very much, across the board the same between this race. And I did it because that's, again, another thematic element that I'm playing with and want to make the readers uncomfortable and put them into situations and make them think about this stuff. And so that's what we do. So, I mean, that kind of bringing this to a conclusion, because we're probably at about time. That's the thing. To me, how I do it is I do a lot of differences. When I'm a character, when I become that narrating character, I'm a guy, I'm a girl, I'm straight, I'm gay, I'm black, I'm white, I'm not even human, whatever the case may be, I'm now that. And so I do try to put the world through that lens. And so again, going to your example where it's a different race looking at the world through a human lens, that's weird. Like that's going to throw readers out every single time, in my opinion.
So don't compare yourself. Don't do. Remember, as you know, comments, and good luck describing your races.
Yeah, and try to avoid being called a racist. Like that's your number one goal. Well, actually, let me end on this one story. So when I first started my private writers group, there was this one guy. He's a millennial. He's in that culture. Call it whatever you want, woke, progressive, whatever. And so he brings this story, this sci-fi story, and they go and meet this character. It's a secondary character, and it's obvious the secondary character is black. It's obvious. And his main character is white. Very obvious. But he refused to write the word black. He refused. And so he described this character in all sorts of different ways. And so when he finished reading it, I'm like, okay, so this character is obviously black that you're describing. Why did you describe him the way that you did? And why didn't you just use something like, black skin, onyx skin, whatever? And he's like, oh, because that's racist. I'm like, okay, let's reread how you describe this character. And so we go through his description. I'm like, this is the most racist description of a black man I have ever read in my entire life. Like, you are horribly racist in doing this. And he's like, well, I can't use black. I'm like, why? And he's like, well, because that's racist. I'm like, so you're a white dude, right? He's like, yeah. I said, how did it feel when I just said you're a white dude? He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, I just called you a white dude. How did it feel? And he's like, it didn't feel anything. I'm like, that's exactly what a black person says when you say you're a black dude or a black girl or a black woman or a black whatever. They feel the same thing. Like, they are a black person. They don't feel like you're going, oh my God, you're being so racist.
The problem comes when you use derogatory terms.
Certainly. Or you can use the word black in a derogatory way too.
Yeah. Or use somebody's culture in a derogatory fashion.
Certainly.
All of those things. Do not do that. That means you're a racist. But
you're a brunette. Am I being racist by calling you a brunette?
Of course not.
No, it's the descriptor. And so, but the funny thing is when he brought it back the next week, because he did bring back the same piece that he rewrote, the dude that they went and met was a white dude. And then I started looking around and every single character was white. And I'm like, okay, let's discuss this. Because now, and you're still digging your heels in and you're like, well, I now see that Drake is right. Everything I described was incredibly racist. So I'm not going to do that. But instead of, having
I'm going to whitewash. Instead of doing that, I'm going to whitewash.
I'm like, so this is a futuristic America built off of a culture of multi-races. That's what we are. We're the melting pot. And you're going to convince me that in 50 years, America is all white. Okay, what happened? How did that happen? Was there a race war? Did we go?
Did you go genocidal? Like what?
Right. Did we go insane? And he's like, no, none of that. I'm like, then you can't have an America 50 years from now that's all white. That's racist. And he's like, so he's stuck in this catch-22 where he's trying to not use. And that's the problem. He was locked up into this whole mindset of the color black is racist. Like, they wouldn't describe my shirt as black because that's racist. I'm like, it's a freaking shirt. It's not racist because it's not a race. Like, it's a color. White's a color, yellow's a color, black's a color, whatever. Although I do think that describing Asians as yellow is a little racist because they're not actually yellow.
Yeah, and there's a slur that I won't say on this channel, but there's a slur associated with calling somebody yellow that I would be careful of using the skin tone.
Right.
Yellow.
So I don't use yellow to describe anything because
ivory. Those are good colors.
Porcelain. Whatever you want to do. There are descriptors that you can use.
You must be cognizant you must be cognizant of that there have been words that have been used as slurs that are associated with color, but black isn't one of them.
Right. Yeah, I've never met a yellow human being. We did have an orange president, so there's that. But but I've never met a yellow human being.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just, again, is this a touchy topic? Yes. Might we get in trouble for this podcast? Maybe. I don't think we came from a place that of anything but love and acceptance.
Yeah.
But it's you still have to paint that picture, and that's how I do it.
See your world, and that means that they will see the differences that your MC sees.
Yeah, and that's the way I feel about it. That's how I like to describe things, and that's one of the reasons why I do have so many different. I do like to have multi-narrating character stories, because it allows me to see the world not just from other characters' perspectives, but other sexualities, other races, other sexes, other demographics, as far as I have poor characters, I have rich characters, I have I like to have that tapestry, that palette to kind of dip my paintbrush into, so I can paint as I'm painting with all these different colors and make this vibrant story, as opposed to, it's one of the reasons why I don't write a lot of single POV stories, because it limits me in how I like to paint.
So in the second book, one of my narrating POV characters is a 200-odd-year-old black woman who is married to 2 husbands. That's not something I'm ever going to be, but it was really fun to write that character.
Again, it's why I go back to, everybody, it's like, oh, you can't write outside of your whatever. I really hate that, because it's so insulting, because what you're saying is I can't empathize with humanity. You're saying I can't, because I was born this way, I can't empathize with what it might feel like to be something else. Well, then how can I write a dragon character or a lion man character or whatever? If I can't do this stuff, then, and talk about a horrible, limitation on stories. Now I can only write stories that have white main characters, and it all has to be told from a white perspective. What a boring author I'm going to be if I can't. I did not say that, but yes, it's just, I don't want to be that author. I want my color palette, that thing that I can dip my paintbrush into, to have all sorts of different things. And the crazy thing is because of how I do it, I do a lot of things accidentally. This is a funny story, a little embarrassing story, in some ways, but so a decade ago or more, the first time I got invited to be the author guest of honor at a convention, this person contacted me and set up a phone call, and I called him, and they were like, hey, I run a convention in California. It's about 2,000 people in size, and we really want to have you as our author guest of honor. And I'm like, oh, awesome. That sounds great. I haven't actually been, this is really early in my career, and I hadn't been author guest of honor yet. And he's like, okay, but it's a furry convention. And I was like, I don't know what that means, but whatever. Author guest of honor, this is awesome. Yeah. And he's like, you don't know what the term furry is? I'm like, no, I've never heard that term. I don't know what that is. And he's like, okay,
you have lion men.
And that's the thing. The lion dude is this big, this big character in this group, and that's why they want to be there as their author guest of honor. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know what that is. And he's like, all right, well, let me send you to some websites and let me show you some things. And I'm like, okay, I don't write any of that I'm looking at here. I don't he goes, no, yeah, there's a lot of sex in the whole, the nudity and stuff like that. He goes, but really the furry culture is just about anamorphized things, like your main lion dude character. Yeah. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, they're cool. So I'm writing this furry for the furry fandom when I didn't even know the fandom existed. Yeah. But it's the same thing. In that same saga, I have a transgendered character. Now, I didn't know this until somebody said, oh, I love the fact that you're writing a main character who's transgendered. And I'm like, what? I don't have a transgender character. What are you talking about? And they're like, yeah, you do. This character, they're transgender. I'm like, well, yeah, they used to be male, but now they're female. Yes, but like I didn't even think about the fact that, because again, I don't write that way. I don't write with agendas. I write things that are interesting to me. And it was interesting because I'm in a magical world. So I can have somebody born male have this magical event happen. And now they're living their life, and technically they actually literally died and then were reborn. But still, technically, that counted for this person who enjoyed the fact that I was writing a transgendered main character. Like, I'm not thinking along those terms. I'm just writing interesting characters. And that's I guess that we should also include that in this. Because a lot of people ask me, like, well, how do you write a good Black character? Or how do you write a good gay character? Or how do you write it? If I'm not Black, if I'm not gay, if I'm not a woman, how do I write a good whatever? And I'm like, oh, that's easy. You don't write a Black character. You don't write a gay character.
You write a character.
You write a character, a really interesting, good character, well-grounded, really interesting. Oh yeah, and they happen to be Black, or they happen to be a woman, or they happen to be
with a real history, with real motivations, with real goals, with a real story arc.
And when you do that,
they happen to be.
Well, but it's not just happen to be, because you don't want to just throw it on as a label.
You don't want to tokenize, but it's not the core that they're gay. They're not made to be gay. They're there to be.
Right. When you make a really rounded, interesting character that is also gay, you can actually pull things from the gay culture and give it to them. And now it feels natural. If you write a character to write a gay character, then their entire identity, their entire persona, their entire everything is gay. And so now everything that you pull from the gay culture and attach to that character, you're just being, homophobic, and it sounds very stereotypical as opposed to being.
Let me tell you, gay people aren't like that. Just FYI. Like, they're not, it's not all about being gay.
Right.
They're humans with dreams and aspirations.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. You don't write these characters. Like, that's when you write stereotypical, insulting characters, when you're like, oh, I'm going to include a gay character because I'm woke. Like, no, you're not. You're literally going to write a terrible, insulting, gay character. And so that's why I said I tend to accidentally do things because they're natural to me. Like, when I have a character who is gay, it's natural to his backstory, his situation. Yes, I do have thematic elements and I'm also threading through there. So it lends itself to those elements or whatever. But so there is some, rhyme and reason for why I do what I do, but it's not the agenda. So I don't write furry fandom stuff. I just happen to have, furry characters.
A big lion dude.
Right. Or whatever, the transgender character, gay characters, these characters are just, but that's not why they're in the story. That's not their core identity. They're not a cardboard cutout of this one thing. And so, that's really what I feel is very important about, and again, it's about empathizing or empathizing. So if I empathize and imagine, that I am something that I'm not, then I have the ability to, put myself in that situation and believe it and really think about what that is like to wear that shoe, as opposed to, just making a cardboard caricature of that thing.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people make that mistake.
And I think that is a great note on which to end this discussion of fantasy races.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Hi guys, this is Marie from Releasing Your Inner Dragon, and I hope you're enjoying the podcast. If you're interested in more content on fantasy world building, head over to YouTube and look up Just in Time Worlds. I release tons of content there. If you'd like to check out my book, The Hidden Blade by Marie M. Mullaney, it is available as an ebook, audiobook, and print book on Amazon. Thanks for listening, and see you soon.
Hey guys, Drake here. Thank you so much for listening to Releasing Your Inner Dragon podcast. I hope you're getting a ton of information and maybe even some nuggets of gold that you can take into your own writing to help you on your journey of story creation. A couple things I want to throw at you. First of all, for the first time in years, I am opening myself up to being a private mentor again. If you would like for me to work with you to improve your writing right now, reach out to me. You can either go to my website, maxwellalexanderdrake.com, and send me a contact form, or just email me at author@maxadrake.com. Also, as many of you may know, I've been out of the novel game for quite a few years. I was the lead fiction writer for EverQuest Next from Sony. I've been in the movie and TV industry for a few years now, but I am excited to say I'm back into the novel game. I've actually been working on a novel for a little while now, and I'm going to start dropping it on Amazon's Vella. So if you're on that platform, look me up, Maxwell Alexander Drake. Thank you again for listening, and as always, keep writing.